Good morning, everyone. Go ahead and get started here. All right. Thank you for joining me this morning. We're here to talk about Force.com code for business logic, triggers, and controllers. Here is the safe harbor statement. Details, you can see the website. All right, what are we going to learn today? First off, what is Apex Code? So how many of you guys have actually used Apex Code before? And how many of you guys have never even heard of it? Okay, well, looks like a lot of people know about it. That's good. A couple of you have used it, even better. Next, we're going to cover how do I use it. So we'll take you through like how you can edit it, where you can edit it, how you can find it in your organization. What can it do? This is just kind of like the high-level features we have. Hopefully, we can like demystify the different features and tools you have with Apex Code to use to build whatever you'd like. And then finally, I have a short demo, hopefully short, where hopefully you guys won't spend too much time staring at code on the screen, but I'll try to keep it to a minimum. A little bit about myself. I'm Ryan Sprates. I've been at Salesforce for about a little under 2.5 years now. I've worked with Apex Code for the entirety of my tenure there. All right, Apex Code is, quite simply spoken, it's a strongly typed object-based programming language. So is anyone familiar with Java? C#? Okay. So if you guys are familiar with either of those languages, Apex will look very familiar to you. The syntax is very closely associated with it. It's mainly Java, but we did steal some syntax from C#. The cool thing about Apex Code is that it is compiled, stored, and executed on the Force.com service. That means that Salesforce not only compiles your code, stores your code, but also executes your code. So you don't have to worry about setting up any IT infrastructure. You don't need servers on which to run your application. We take care of all of that for you. At the bottom here, I have a short little code snippet just so you guys can get used to seeing it. We've got a class, Hello World, and I've shown off some of the object-oriented features we got. We got extends, a base class, and it implements an example. So we've got some polymorphism and inheritance going on. And then we just have this static method, say hello, which is going to print to the debug log, hello world. All right, how can I use Apex Code? There's two main code bodies, I guess. The first is the database trigger. If you are familiar with stored procedures, this will sound very familiar to you. It's Apex code that is executed in response to a database interaction. So you can set up an Apex trigger, say, to execute whenever somebody inserts a new contact into your organization. That's a very common example. You can have it do it not only on insert, but you can also hit update, delete, and undelete. So whenever anyone touches any type of record, you can actually have Apex Code fire to perform some business logic on that record or even other records. The other thing we have is a class, which is very similar to a Java or a .NET class. Apex triggers can call into classes, so you don't have to have all of your logic in one trigger. You can keep your logic in classes and separate it out, and then just have the trigger call into different classes. Differences between triggers and classes. Triggers execute implicitly, meaning that whenever, say you have a trigger on before update of a contact, whenever you update in a contact, that trigger fires automatically. There's no way to fire a class implicitly. You need to call into a class from these different entry points that I have listed up there. Real briefly, there's email to Apex, meaning Apex can process incoming emails. So say if someone sends an email to a specified address, you can have Apex code execute, which can parse through that email and find different information and store it in your database. There's Apex Web Services. You can expose your Apex methods externally so that other systems can actually call in. We have Visualforce controllers that you can create like a button or a link on your Visualforce page that when somebody clicks it will call an Apex class method and execute some code for you. We also have test methods, which we allow for you to write unit tests in Apex. And so whenever you run those unit tests, they can obviously execute Apex code. Otherwise, they wouldn't be testing very much. And then we also have a system log window, which I'll show off to you in just a second, where it's kind of like a cool little debug shell where you can just try Apex code out and see what it does and make sure it works. All right. So how do I use Apex code? All right, so this should look fairly familiar to all you guys. This is what it looks like inside of a standard Force.com developer org. First thing I wanted to show off was that cool little debug log I was telling you guys about. It's that system log. Uh-oh. Got to enable pop-ups. And here we go. So now we can just do instantiate an object and click the execute. Ta-da. So now I can even build it out a little bit further, and maybe I want to insert that object. So I have an object in my org called account. That's a standard Salesforce object. Assume you guys are kind of familiar with it. So I'm going to insert a new account with the name ASDF. Ta-da, done. So you can use that to just kind of play around with Apex code. You can insert records, update records, do all kinds of fun stuff. It's a good way to get comfortable with the code, just experiment a little bit without having to go ahead and like write classes. Yes, absolutely. Yes. So from here, if, say I had a class already created, I could call into a class with a method called method, just like that. And then for those of you who are not familiar with where I even find the Apex code editor, it's under the develop tree in the setup screen. So you just run on down to Apex classes, and here you can create new and edit your current existing, et cetera, et cetera. The editor is kind of cool. Here's the editor where you can create a class and save it. Maybe. There we go. All right, so now what I just did there was I actually created a class and stored it on our service. It compiled on our service, whole shebang. All right, so the other way to edit Apex code is we do have an IDE available. I won't go into it at this time, but it's based off Eclipse, so any of you are familiar with Eclipse, it should be a little easier for you guys to navigate. I suggest it for doing more complicated projects. For simple ones, I think the browser does just fine. All right, now for the meat of the presentation, what can Apex code do for you? What different features do we have built into the language? First off, just kind of the regular programming language stuff. We have data types. So here I just listed off these default data types that we have in Apex: integers, booleans, IDs, decimals, dates, doubles, times, long strings, date times. And you'll notice there's a couple at the end there that are a little special. See, I created a thing called account. So Apex is schema aware. So that means that if you have custom objects, or even in this case standard objects in your application, Apex knows about them. It knows what fields they have. It knows what field types they are, etc. So standard S objects like account, contact, opportunity sound a little familiar. You can just refer to those in Apex as is. Now you look at the line below that, line 8. You'll see custom object _ C. So now if you make any custom objects in your organization, say you want to track, it's an example here. You can basically check, say you want to track widgets. You can make a widget _ C object. It's actually, when you create it, you just call it widget. But when you want to refer to it, you need to tell Apex that, hey, this is a custom object. I made this. That's what the _ C tag does. So with the _ C tag, you could actually make a custom object called account. And you could just, whenever you wanted to refer to your custom object and not the standard object, you just put the _ C on, and Apex knows that, hey, this isn't the standard account, this is a special one that he made. I don't suggest doing that, however, because it's confusing. At the bottom there, we have our collections. We got lists, sets, and maps. Yeah, not a whole lot to say about those. They're fairly standard collections. I'll be familiar with them all. We also have error handling, which I couldn't fit on the slide. So we do have try, catch, and finally, if you guys are familiar with error handling in Java. Flow control. So we have, if statements, while statements, else statements, for loops, the whole, all the standard ones. I think there's even a do while. All right, so now some of the cooler stuff. Apex can edit records. It's really simple to do database transactions in Apex. If you look at my little fake class there, I made a thing called account util. It has a static method called insert account, and you give it the account name. And all that does is it creates a new account object, specifies the name to be the string that I passed in, and then goes ahead and just does an insert, and bam, that record is now in my database. So not only can you, well, obviously you can insert, but you can also do update, delete, and undelete. And there's also like the dark horse merge and upsert, which are a little more complicated, but they're also available to you. So not only can you edit the records, put them in, change them, and delete them, you can also find them. So we have a query language that's built into Apex that's actually evaluated at compile time. So you'll see there I have this account is going to be select the ID and name from my account table, where the ID is the ID that I specified. And then it's going to return that. So if ever I wanted to grab an account with the ID of 1234, I would just call this function with 1234 as the parameter, and it would pass me back an account with that ID. All right, database triggers. So this is another large fraction of Apex. As I mentioned before, triggers are the things that execute implicitly. So you see how you can define on what object it acts. So this one, in this example, it's acting on account. You see the on account keyword up there. And then it also can specify on which database transaction you want to fire. In this case, it's on inserts, and it executes before the insert happens. Yeah, you also can do after inserts, before update, before delete, after delete, and or not after delete. It's kind of silly. And then undelete as well. So basically, what this trigger does, I'll step you through this because the triggers are probably one of the more confusing things that we got, and even that's not that hard. So when somebody creates a bunch of accounts, what I'm doing here is I'm iterating through those accounts that are being made. And you'll see that for loop in there. So I iterate through each new account that's being made. And in that for loop, I create a new contact. And I just give it some default values. I make the last name be the same name as the account. That doesn't really make sense, but I need to give it something. And then I specified that this contact is going to be associated with the account that I'm being made. So basically what happens here is whenever somebody creates a new account, I automatically create a contact and associate it with that account. So now any account that gets made will always have at least one contact with it because I make it by default. So basically I iterate through all those new accounts, add these new contacts, and at the end I insert all the contacts at once. So a little caveat with triggers is you don't want, so what I could have done is inside that for loop I could have done an insert, I could have inserted the contact within the for loop, but if that were to happen I'd call the insert like, for however many accounts are being made at this time. So say someone does a bulk API operation and they insert 200 accounts. I'm going to be calling insert contacts 200 times. So that not only is that inefficient, but that'll actually hit some of the limits we have in Apex to prevent people from doing like infinite loops or very large database transactions that could actually harm our service. So it's called bulkifying the triggers. We talk about it in the documentation. It's a best practice, and you really, really need to do it. And something to really watch out for when you're creating triggers. Next, we got Apex Web Services. Now, the cool thing about making web service in Apex is that it is super easy. Basically, all I did is I think I did the same. Yeah, I stole my insert account method from before, and I turned it into a web service by just adding the web service keyword. So now, any class that has a web service in it, you can generate a WSDL, and you can import that WSDL into whatever other application you have, and there you go. You can start calling that web service externally. Super easy to do. So not only can we allow people to access our information from within our application, but we can also grab stuff externally as well. I think yesterday there was, the hackathon was, if you can integrate with Twitter, you win a prize or whatever it was. Is that right? Anyone notice that? Just a laptop? Okay. So anyways, here I did it for you if anyone wants to copy this. So basically this just calls out to Twitter and returns whatever tweet. Looks like I'm looking for the query string CRM, and I'm returning 50 results. So here I just kind of set up my call out, do the http.send, and then I guess the last line there, I'm parsing the results. So that's not an automatic. That's not an automatic feature. You have to parse your own results, obviously. So yeah, callouts also super easy. Nothing to be scared of. You could get access to any external application you want. Google Finance is a popular one, etc. All right, one that I don't have a code example for, but I am going to show you guys later in the demo is Visualforce controllers. So you can, who's familiar with Visualforce? Okay, cool. So quite a few of you. Visualforce, for those of you who aren't, Visualforce is our UI development language. It's a markup language. It allows you to create the custom pages, basically. If you don't like our layouts, you can make your own layouts. If you want to add functionality, you can add it. So basically, you can create controllers to back these pages such that your pages can then perform business logic for you. So say you wanted to make a new page that has a button that does X, Y, and Z. You can create that page, put a button on it, and create an Apex class that has a method that does X, Y, or Z. And you can wire that button to call that method. Pretty simple stuff. So next we also have it's a newer feature, still in pilot actually. It's called Scheduled Apex. So if you think cron job, you can actually schedule Apex jobs to run at certain times, at specified intervals, etc. So to implement Scheduled Apex, it's pretty easy. You just implement an interface that has an execute method, and then you just fill that execute method with the code that you want to be executed. And then, there's a scheduler screen where you can schedule it to run at a certain time, or at a specified interval, either way. And voila, it's set up and it should be going. All right, testing. So this is a often overlooked feature of Apex. We allow you to write unit tests to test your Apex code. And not only do we allow you to do it, but we kind of make you do it. In order to deploy Apex code to your production environment, you need to have at least 75% code coverage. So that's one thing to take into account. And by code coverage, I mean we look at what lines of code this test method executes and make sure that that's at least 75% of your total code before you can deploy it. So basically, to denote something as a test method, you'll see I have two ways of doing it. We have that is_test annotation at the top that you can put at your class. And basically, that removes this class from our limits on how much Apex code you can have in an application. So I think our current limit is 2 megs of Apex code, which is a lot of code. But just in case people want to write extra tests, we don't want to penalize anyone. Is it 2 megs? 1 meg. Sorry, I stand corrected. So yeah, this is_test removes it from that counter. Then to denote a method as a test method, we have the test method keyword. Again, it's very easy to it's kind of like our version of JUnit. You just kind of throw in the test method keyword, and it acts as a test method. And in here, it looks like I'm testing that insert account method I made before. So I call my account util.insertAccount and give it a name, test. And then I query to make sure that I only have that one account with name test in my application, in my organization, sorry. And then at the end, I assert that my count is 1, which is what I expect it to be. So now to run all the tests, whenever you look at your Apex class page, you'll actually see a button at the top that says Run All Tests. And all you have to do is click that, and then we show you a really cool page that has all kinds of statistics and diagnostics of your code. It'll tell you how many tests passed, how many failed, what the error messages were, what lines of code you have covered, what lines you don't have covered. And that's with a cool like pop-up window that shows your actual code and has the lines that you have covered in blue and the lines that you didn't cover in red. So it's very easy for you to find what areas of your application don't have appropriate test coverage. Yes, sir.
I work with a non-developer, but I work very closely with one.
Mm-hmm.
Writing test coverage is the least favorite part of development, right? You'll develop on something in 3 weeks and then have to spend 3-4 days just building it.
Yeah.
Is there any plan to make it a little easier in the future, like the test code builds itself?
Easy take it.
Something, like where the test code kind of builds itself, like the classes are referencing these objects, and therefore the test code knows it needs to reference these objects and kind of
So
build itself a little.
I guess the comment is that creating the tests is often a very difficult and viewed as time-consuming part of development. There are no plans to make it easier, like you mentioned, in the future that I'm aware of. I'm not going to say that there is or there isn't, but I would kind of disagree with the mentality on the whole thing. Is that testing is a very important part of application development, and it really kind of takes a back seat very often, as it appears it is in this case. And I would just have to disagree with that, and that's the way that the team feels as well. Is that it's very important and needs to be almost center stage to go along. You should do it in pair with development, So it shouldn't be like the afterthought that comes back later and it's like, oh crap, I got to write 4 days worth of tests. You kind of build it as you go along. It's easier to write it because you're familiar with the code. You just wrote the code, then you can test the code, and it's actually faster to do it that way. That might be a suggestion for you guys to try, is to do the testing as you develop. All right, not at all lastly, we have email services. So I mentioned a little bit before about this processing of ingoing email. Not only can we process ingoing email, but we can also send email from Apex. So say you want someone to, whenever something gets updated, you want to send someone a reminder or a notification email that said, hey, somebody updated your record. Is this a big deal? You can do that. You can send email to customers. You can process incoming email, and then send it right back to them if you want. So you can actually make the illusion that you're actually doing something in between, but in actuality it's all automated. So workflow is constrained by, what you have available within workflow. With Apex Code, you have the ability to do many, many, many more things. So it's not like it's, I wouldn't say it's better than workflow because they can both do the same thing, but Apex Code allows you to do more things. So say with workflow, you can't call out to an external service and then take some information, then send that in an email out somewhere else. That's something you can only do in Apex. Right. Oh, true. Very much so. Our declarative tools are very powerful. Oh, sorry. Oh, yes. Sorry about that. So that point was that he was wondering what the difference was between sending email like this and also in workflow. And I was just pointing out that, they both do the same thing. They both send email. But in Apex, you have a lot more options at your disposal. So you have full access to, you can, like I said, you can call out to other places. You can do all kinds of cross-object references that you apparently can't do in workflow. And he was just pointing out that it seemed easier to use workflow in some circumstances because it is declarative. And with that, I agree. Our declarative tools are very powerful, and you don't need to use Apex Code if you don't have to. Yes, right there. Say it again? Can you call an email? Oh, recall an email. No, only if when you process it, you save it. Sorry, the question was, can you recall an email? If when you take in that incoming email, if you were to save it in your application somewhere.
got the approval notice, he approves it and get an error from the workflow.
Okay, so I mean, that sounds like so the case was, I think, that somebody needs to approve an email that gets approved by someone else first. Is that right? Yes, and so whenever they try to approve it, they then get an error because it's already approved. I wouldn't really suggest this, but you could write your own approval process in Apex from scratch. If this is absolutely a big deal, I think that you could probably get away with dealing with the errors. But if that's not an option, this is totally doable. You just have to create some database schema to maintain the emails that have been sent and received, and then whenever somebody does something, you can search through your tables to try and see if that email's already been approved or that process has already been approved, and then you won't throw the error then. Another thing we have Batch Apex. This is one of our newest features. I worked on this feature. I'm very proud of it. Allows you to operate on large data sets asynchronously. So what that means is that say you have your organization has millions of rows, millions of leads, millions of accounts, millions of whatever. Traditionally, standard Apex would not be able to actually process all 1 million of those because, like I said before, we have those limits that prevent people from gobbling up all of the server power and all the resources and actually choking out other customers. So we actually restrain people from doing that kind of operation. What Batch Apex does is allows you to do that from Apex code without having to write like a Java client that would use our API, which would be kind of a mess. Batch Apex allows you to, within Apex code, write a class that will actually have the ability to process up to 50 million records. And it does it asynchronously. So basically, you implement this interface. You implement a couple methods. One of the methods goes out and gathers all the rows you want to operate on. So in my example, we'll say, select all accounts. And then you also specify another method is what you want to do to those accounts. And then we also have like a finally method that just says like at the end of the batch job, do this. I mean, a lot of people use that to like send notification emails that their batch job finished, or you can kind of do whatever you want. So there's a start, execute, and finish. And with that, you have the power to, like I said, iterate through a ton of records. And so when you actually execute that method, it puts on a queue, and Salesforce will then process it as we can. So, I mean, there's no guarantee that it'll process within the next 5 minutes, 5 seconds, anything like that. But it will get done. Just might wait till after peak hours are over or something like that. Yes? Chatter. As far as how they've integrated Chatter into Apex, I'm not 100% certain. I don't think they have yet. No, they have not. Getting a head shake. So in the future, that's a possibility, but I can't speak on whether or not it's coming in the near future, long future, or ever. So. Yeah, so like the Chatter API doesn't exist yet, so we don't have access to that. Yes? So batch Apex error handling, that's a little out of scope of our talk here. It's a little complicated, but I'll try to be brief. So ideally, you would write your own error handling within your batch execute method. So it's something you do. Basically, you surround everything with a try catch, and then if you catch anything, you send an email to yourself. You can save a record in your database in a fake logging thing that you've made, something like that. That would be my advised way of doing it. Does that answer your question? Okay. All right, so now we got a demo, and looks like we're tracking about on time here. So I've talked about it at length, ad nauseum, and now I'm going to actually show you guys some of the stuff that I built real quick and let you guys take a look at the code and see how it's done. So I just kind of made up this crummy use case here. We want to make a portfolio tracking application, so we'll use everybody's favorite stock market. Requirements are to maintain a table of companies, ticker symbols, and stock prices. So that's going to be our schema. We're going to have a custom object called companies. It's going to contain their stock ticker, the company name, and their current price. Now, what I want to do is I want to automatically get the current stock price whenever somebody adds a new company. So basically, all you have to do is specify the company name and the ticker symbol, and I'll automatically run out to Google Finance and pull the current stock price and put it into our database. Next, we also need to allow external applications to get to our portfolio. So say we have another system that sits outside of Salesforce. Maybe it's a partner, maybe it's a customer, maybe it's us. And they need to be able to get access to the information we have. Next, we also have a update price button to update the price. So without using scheduled Apex, that price isn't going to get updated unless we manually do it. So we're going to have a manual button that you can click it, and it runs out and grabs all the new prices for your companies that you have listed. And finally, we need to allow portfolio addition from the account screen. It'd be very, very convenient if when you're looking at the account for Mr. So-and-so, you can actually add new companies to his portfolio from that same screen. And we'll show you a quick demo on how to do that too. All right, so back to here. So first requirement was maintain a table of companies, tickers, and stock prices. So I'm sure you guys are familiar with this, but I'll just show it off just for completeness sake. We're going to make a custom object called company, and it's going to be a master detail with account. Are you familiar with master detail relationships? We all good? All right, so basically it's like a one-to-many relationship if you aren't familiar. So on that company, we have a few custom fields here. We have the master detail field, we have the price, and we also have the ticker symbol. Put that up on the screen. All right, so now automatically get the current stock price upon company addition. So whenever somebody adds a new company, we want to run out and do a task. What sounds like the best way to do that? Anyone? Trigger. Excellent. Excellent. Not only a trigger, but a trigger on insert. Even better. So that was my first thing that I did, is I went ahead and wrote this trigger called grab ticker price. Fairly straightforward. So whenever we want to insert any number of companies, we're going to go ahead and look through all the companies that we're inserting, and then we're going to grab the IDs of those companies, and then we're going to call this stockutil.getStockPrices. And that is obviously that's a class that I wrote. That does not come standard at all. So I'll run you over to that and just show you what stockutil.getStockPrices looks like. All right, so here is get stock prices. A couple really cool things to note about this. You see the @future annotation at the top? That's something that I, for some reason, didn't have in the presentation before, and I apologize. But that is called async Apex, asynchronous Apex. So it's basically kind of like, think of it like a smaller batch job. Instead of processing all this stuff now when it's called, we actually just put it on a queue and process it later. Now that kind of benefits everyone. It benefits Salesforce because we can defer processing that transaction until at a later time when, say, we're off peak hours or the server's not super busy right now. And it also benefits end users because just think if you clicked a button and you wanted to call out to some external web service. So what if that web service takes 5-6 seconds to return? You have to sit there on your loading screen, locked, can't do anything until that thing finally returns and you process all the results, and then you finally get to see the rest, carry about your workday. So what this does is it allows that screen to just call that method, put it on the queue, and then go ahead and refresh, and we'll process whatever you want to do later at a later time. So, get stock prices. First thing we're going to do, we take in a collection of company IDs. First thing we're going to do, We're going to find those companies that we here, let's scroll that over. So take a look at the query here. We've got select ID, name, and ticker symbol from company, where the ID is within our collection. So that's a pretty simple query. Next thing we're going to do is we need to get those ticker symbols into some kind of format that are what we used in here. Google Finance will recognize. So Google Finance uses comma-separated ticker symbols. So if you wanted to get a whole bunch of ticker symbols, you just get them all lined up and put a comma between them all and pass that in. So that's what that next chunk's doing. Then we're going to perform that call out. So we set our endpoint, send our request. Then once again, we find the company IDs. And then we want to go ahead and parse the results of that call out. So what that's going to do is that's going to take our company IDs and take the results and match the two of them together. So we have this company ID is worth this much, this company ID is worth this much, et cetera, et cetera. And then lastly, we're going to load those prices into our company object and then update them. So I could show you the parsing, but that's kind of boring. So we'll go ahead and skip that. So anyways, quick recap. So we have a trigger on company. So wherever you insert a company, trigger fires. That then calls this async apex method that does a call out. And that's going to go ahead and retrieve all of our stock price information and update it at a later time. All right, our next requirement was allow external apps to get portfolios. So this is actually a really easy requirement because, like I said before, it's super easy to make web services. In fact, right here, I did it right here. stockutil.getPortfolio. Pass in an account ID. First thing we're going to do is we're going to find all of the companies that are associated with that account. And then we're going to just load those up into a list of strings, which has the ticker symbol and the stock price separated by a colon. See that up there? And then just return it. Fairly simple. And then we'll let whoever consumed our web service parse those results and take them apart and say, oh, this. Yes?
In the code the trigger code,
Yes.
is there a test for that too, or is it just the class?
So yeah, so it's 75% class coverage, and you have to fire all triggers once. So we kind of call it 1% trigger coverage, meaning it has to be used at some point. So you would have to write a test that would insert a company. So another thing I kind of added at the last second here was we want to also expose that update stock prices feature, because if somebody wants to get our portfolio information, they're probably going to want an up-to-date version of our portfolio. So let's allow them from outside to call update stock prices. So again, all I did is I just made that method and then I slapped the web service on it. I'm done. And update stock prices basically does the same thing as that trigger. It just finds all the ticker symbols and sends them off to that same call out. Oh. It's kind of bad, I warn you. I didn't write super good code for the parsing. So basically, it returns a large string that I have to go through and find landmarks and take substrings, and it's kind of gross. I apologize for not doing a better job of that. Yes, sir. Say it again? Can I put that on CodeShare? Absolutely. Absolutely. Sorry, I can't hear you. Yes. No. Oh, yes. So he was curious, because I have that future annotation on my get stock prices, is there any way for me to know when that finishes programmatically so that I know that I can call the get stock prices, I assume. Is that right? The answer to that is there's no way to know programmatically when that's done. If you're using the API, you could query this object called the async apex job object and give it the ID of your async apex job. And once that is completed, it'll update to completed. And then you'll know that it's done. So you have to like do some kind of loop that does this query and waits for it to be done and then carries on. Oh, yes. Say that again, sorry.
Instead of rewrite, because I noticed you had to rewrite the code to make it a WSDL. Can you inherit an existing function and just like, extend it or something like that?
So the question was, do I have to rewrite the code to get it into a WSDL? Or can I just inherit some other class or some other method and make it a web service? I don't really think you don't need to rewrite any code, really. You just need to change the keyword or add a keyword to it. So the question is what if I want both an internal-facing method and an external-facing method? The answer to that is if you add the web service keyword, it does not mean that it can't be used internally anymore. If you call that method from Apex, it acts just like it's a normal method. So the web service keyword does not limit your functionality in any way. It just expands it. All right, so now we're going to move on to create and update price button. So for this, we're going to use a little bit of our declarative tools in conjunction with some Apex code. So you can see the marriage of the two. Let's see, so we need to run up to accounts, buttons and links. So here we wanted to add a button to the account page that allows you to just click it and then it will update all your stock prices. Create this new button, this new custom button called Update Prices. And I'm going to make it a JavaScript button. And this is, when I was making this demo and I started doing this, I had no idea how to do this. So the cool thing is I literally went to Google, I typed in Salesforce custom button execute web service. And bam, that was it. I found somebody else that had done it and posted it on the community board. I copied, pasted it, changed the name of the class and method, and I was done. So despite being a relatively newer language, we do have a lot of community support, and it is pretty easy to find stuff that people have already done before and just kind of trade in and out with them. So basically all this does is you'll see that sforce.apex.execute, that's executing the web service in the class stock util with the method update stock prices. And the last parameter is just the parameters to pass into that web service. And then it's going to pop up a little window that says, hey, your stuff's been updated, and then refresh the page. And now I will allow you to see that in action. All right, so see my little fake portfolio here? We got 3M, AT&T, Caterpillar, and Express Scripts. If I go ahead and click this update, just make note of one of the prices. AT&T is $26.11. It is now $26.07. So there you have it, real time. We went out and updated all those stock prices. So now you'll note that I did make that a future method, so that was actually done asynchronously. But you see how fast it actually ended up processing? There's no guarantee that it's going to execute that fast, but from personal experience, I can say that it's got pretty good the async queues empty out with a lot of vast frequency. So now the last thing we want to do is we wanted to add this cool little feature here that allows you to add a new company from the account screen. So you see this little widget I made here? You add the company name. What's everyone's favorite company. Come on. Come on, company man. And we got the ticker. Click add company. Ta-da. CRM right there. It went out and grabbed the stock price like we told it to. It is $62.08. So now, how do we make this? First off, it required an Apex page and, or it's called Visualforce page, sorry, and an Apex controller. So first off, we'll take a quick look at the controller. Company widget controller. Now you'll notice that it has a constructor. And that constructor passes in a very odd-looking argument. Apex pages dot standard controller STD controller, which stands for standard. That sounds weird now that I said it out loud. All this does is it specifies that, hey, this class extends our standard controller. So Visualforce has these standard controllers that allow you to hook in, that gives you like some default functionality like edit, save, cancel, some other, some basic stuff. So it's all available in our documentation. So this is extending that. So all that does is we have two member variables, one called ACCT for the account, and the other one called the company. So in the constructor, we're just grabbing the account that this page is referencing to. So because this is a controller extension, it has access to the same account that the standard controller is working on. So whenever you're viewing a standard account page, you have access to the account on which that you are viewing. And the other thing we're doing is we're instantiating this company object that we're going to insert later. So you see there, we also have this add company method, and that's what our Visualforce is going to call. We're going to have a button. You saw that add company button I had on that widget? All that does is it calls this add company method. And you see all that does is it takes the company, specifies to which account it's associated, and then inserts it, and then reinstantiates it again so it clears out all the old fields. Now you may be wondering, where's the stock ticker come from? Where's the company name come from? Looks like we're just inserting a blank company that's associated with our account. And for that, that's where we get to show off the cool interlinking between Visualforce and Apex. Here's my little Visualforce page that I inserted into my account page. See that it just specifies a standard controller account. And it says that, hey, we're not only using the standard controller, but we're also using an extension called company widget controller. First line. So then we create a new form, do some stylistic stuff. You'll see that on line 5, we got a command button. It says add company. And its action is add company. So that whenever I click that button, it knows what method to call. Yes, sir? I don't understand the question, sorry. So as far as specifying what controller, is that what you want to know? Yeah, that has to be at the top when you open the page. Yes. Can you have more than one extension? Yes, I believe you can. I think it's comma separated, but I might be wrong about that. That should be mentioned in the docs. Does anybody yell at me? Am I wrong? Yes, ma'am? Comma separated? All right, excellent. Probably, but I won't. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. Sorry about that. So now, again, the initial question we walked in here with was, where does the information for my company come from? right here, actually, we've got these two Apex input fields. And you'll see that the value that they go to is the company.name and the company.ticker. So when I fill out those fields on my little page and I click that Add Company button, it passes whatever information I have in those two input fields into my controller. Yes, sir? It's associated correctly to... So if I typed in like Procter & Gamble and then put somebody else's ticker symbol in, I don't actually have that in there right now. If I wanted to add that functionality, I would do that probably in my callout, or when I'm parsing the results, because I know the company name, I know the ticker symbol, and with the ticker symbol that comes back, with the stock price that comes back, I also get the company's name. I'd match those two up there and throw errors appropriately. All right, so now we've created this Visualforce page. We've got a controller behind it that does our logic for us, inserts that company. How do we get it to show up on our page? For that, we've got to step in again to our declarative tools, to our page layout editor. All right, so you see right here, I dropped this Visualforce page right into the page. So basically, you run up here, click on Visualforce pages. It gives you your available pages. In my case, it was company widget. And you just drag it to wherever you want it. Say right there. Save. Ta-da. So now I just created a Visualforce page, gave it a controller, and put it on my accounts screen.
Just to clarify, if you created multiple extensions based on different objects, when you go into
That wouldn't work.
account, you only see the extensions that are appropriate to the object.
So
Extension for contacts, if you went into the page layout for accounts, you're only going to see your
correct. So his question was if you have multiple extensions that reference different objects and you put them all on, say, the account page, what would happen?
No, just that if you have multiple extensions created, only the extensions that are appropriate to that the object will be going to show up.
Oh, yes. So in the page layout editor, is that what you're talking about? Yes. So if we were to go look on the contact page layout screen, we wouldn't see our account widget to be able to put in there, because our account widget deals with accounts, obviously. All right. Key takeaways. Apex Code is by no means a substitution for our declarative tools, but it can definitely add some stuff to it. So you need to kind of make that evaluation of whether or not the project you're working on is best suited to use our declarative tools, or if you need to step over and do it programmatically. And with Apex, you can get, basically you can customize to infinity at that point. And also another big thing we're trying to get customers to remember is that you don't need to process all of your data right now. You can push to our different async frameworks. We have that async Apex where you just annotate with future, and that's for smaller transactions. And if you want to operate on millions of rows, we also have batch Apex that is now available. Yes, ma'am. Okay, so the question is for people that are not familiar with programming languages at all, how would I suggest that they kind of get into the whole Apex thing? They know the admin side, they've been admins for a while, but they don't have any experience with OO programming. I know that Salesforce offers 2 classes. There's Dev 401 and Dev 501, and those would be good places to get started. Also, our documentation is pretty good. Although if you have no programming experience, it might be a little trying the first few times you look through it. But yeah, I would highly recommend the classes. The workbook. We have a workbook. So I would suggest that as well. Thank you.